The Laughing Ghost of Ward B, a true hospital horror story. Tonight, I have a story that wasn't experienced by me directly, but was shared by someone who endured something truly unsettling. It's a tale that crawled under my skin, originating from a place designed for recovery, but which, for one man, became a stage for inexplicable dread. He recounted his experience, and now I share it with you. Let's call the man at the center of this story Noah. Noah's life, by his own admission back then, was spiraling, caught in the relentless grip of alcoholism. It wasn't just a casual habit. It was a dependency that was fraying the edges of his existence, straining his relationships, particularly with his wife. Reaching a breaking point, she made the difficult decision to seek professional help for him. Their search led them to a specific, somewhat remote psychiatric facility located in the southern provinces. This institution, while primarily known for treating severe mental health conditions, had a lesser-known wing dedicated to addiction rehabilitation, specifically for those battling alcohol dependency. It wasn't a typical hospital setting most are familiar with. Its reputation was tied more to the profound psychological struggles of its primary patient population, lending it an inherently unsettling atmosphere even before Noah experienced anything out of the ordinary. The admission process was clinical, perhaps even cold. Papers were signed, agreements made. Noah was committed to a mandatory 2-month inpatient program. The objective was clear: detoxification, enforced sobriety, a chance to break the cycle. His wife, though pained, saw it as the only remaining option. Noah, feeling a mixture of resentment, resignation, and perhaps a flicker of hope he wouldn't admit to, found himself escorted to the alcohol rehabilitation ward. This section of the facility was physically separate from the areas housing patients with severe psychiatric disorders. Yet the overarching sense of being within an institution dedicated to minds under duress was inescapable. The ward itself was starkly functional, built for purpose rather than comfort. Shared rooms lined a sterile corridor, each furnished with basic metal-framed beds and minimal personal space. The routine was rigid, governed by timetables for meals, minimal recreational activities, and, most crucially, medication distribution. Life for Noah quickly fell into a monotonous rhythm. Days were spent in a haze of boredom and introspection, marked by the slow crawl of the clock towards evening. The evenings held a particular significance. As dusk settled, the patients in the alcohol rehab wing would queue up for their nightly medication. These weren't simple vitamins. They were potent sedatives, specifically administered to manage the often severe physical and psychological symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. The shakes, the anxiety, the desperate cravings, the medication was intended to suppress these, to chemically enforce calm during the difficult night hours when the urge to drink might be strongest. Noah described the effect of these sedatives vividly. He said it wasn't just drowsiness, it was like being submerged in thick, heavy water. A profound lethargy would set in within minutes of swallowing the pill, clouding his thoughts, making his limbs feel like lead. It wasn't a gentle drift into sleep, but a heavy, almost anesthetic stupor that pulled him under, ensuring he remained passive and dormant until morning. There were no dreams he could recall during this induced oblivion, just a blank space between taking the medication and waking up groggy the next day. Some patients, he noted with a shudder, reacted even more strongly, sometimes seen sitting slack-jawed, drool escaping their lips, lost entirely to the drug's grip. In the shared room assigned to Noah, several other men were undergoing the same treatment. Beds were arranged along opposite walls. Directly across from Noah's bed was one occupied by a much older man. This man was a source of morbid fascination and unease for Noah from the beginning. Unlike the other patients who might mill about during the day, Noah only ever saw this old man in the evenings, usually brought in by staff just before medication time. The man seemed ravaged by his addiction, his body frail but his eyes sometimes holding a flicker of desperate intensity. What set him apart, however, were the restraints. Every evening, attendants would secure thick straps around his wrists and ankles, fastening them to the bed frame. The reason became terrifyingly clear as the nights wore on. Once the initial wave of sedation hit the ward and an artificial quiet fell, the old man's struggles would begin. Muffled groans would escalate into guttural shouts and pained cries. He would thrash violently against the restraints, the metal bed frame rattling and screeching in the otherwise silent room. It sounded, Noah said, like someone battling unseen demons, lost in the throes of extreme withdrawal or perhaps delirium tremens. It was a deeply disturbing nightly ritual. The other patients, including Noah, would endure the sounds, cocooned in their own chemically induced fog, eventually succumbing fully to the sedatives before the old man's ordeal reached its peak or conclusion for the night. Come morning, the old man would be gone, presumably taken elsewhere by the staff, his bed empty until the evening routine began anew. Noah initially felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion towards the restrained man. His nightly struggles were a stark reminder of the destructive power of the addiction they were all there to fight. But the routine, however grim, became part of the ward's strange normalcy. Days bled into weeks. Noah found himself adapting, albeit reluctantly. He followed the schedule, took his medication without protest, and endured the nightly disturbances from the opposite bed. Surprisingly, he began to feel a physical change. The constant, gnawing craving for alcohol started to subside. He could eat meals without feeling the immediate urge to drink afterward. He found he could pass the time reading or simply sitting quietly, his mind less frantic. He was, by the program's standards, improving. He was approaching the end of his first month. The initial shock of the environment had worn off, replaced by a dull, institutional boredom. He felt better physically, clearer mentally, and began to think that perhaps he didn't need the full 2 months. The desire to leave, to return to some semblance of a normal life, grew stronger each day. He still had to take the evening sedatives, still drifted into that heavy stupor, and still heard the muffled, disturbing sounds from the old man's bed across the room before unconsciousness claimed him. It was a bleak, predictable existence, the calm before a storm he couldn't possibly have anticipated. The stage was set. A recovering alcoholic, housed in a wing of a psychiatric facility, growing accustomed to a grim but stable routine, unaware that the boundaries of reality within those walls were about to fray. The fragile, monotonous piece of Noah's existence within the facility was abruptly shattered one morning. It wasn't a loud noise or a sudden event, but rather an absence. The bed opposite his, usually empty by morning after the old man's nightly ordeal and subsequent removal by staff, remained untouched. There was no sign of the old man having been brought in the previous evening, no sounds of struggle piercing through Noah's sedative-induced haze. The entire day passed with the bed remaining starkly, unnervingly empty. A seed of disquiet took root in Noah. While the man's nightly thrashing was disturbing, his complete absence felt somehow more ominous. Later that day, mustering his courage, Noah approached one of the regular attendants, the rather curt, middle-aged nurse who often distributed the evening medication. He tried to keep his tone light, casual. "Excuse me," he ventured. "The older gentleman, the one who usually sleeps in that bed," he gestured across the room. "I didn't see him last night. Has he been moved? Is he all right?" Her reply was delivered with a chilling lack of inflection, a bluntness that struck Noah harder than a physical blow. "He's dead," she stated flatly, before turning and walking away, leaving Noah standing there, stunned into silence. Dead? How? When? There had been no commotion, no indication of a medical emergency. The casual, almost dismissive way she'd said it felt profoundly wrong. Noah felt a cold wave wash over him. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the old man had passed away quietly elsewhere in the facility. Maybe his addiction finally claimed him. Still, the nurse's callousness was jarring. He spent the rest of the day troubled, the empty bed across the room feeling like a void. Evening arrived, and with it, the familiar ritual of medication time. Noah queued up, took his pill, and returned to his bed, the nurse's words still echoing in his mind. He settled down, waiting for the familiar heavy drowsiness to claim him. Then he saw him. The old man walked into the room, not escorted by attendants, not shuffling weakly, but walking in under his own power, calm and composed. He looked directly at Noah, offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then simply lay down on his bed. There were no restraints, no attendants fussing over him. He was just there. Noah stared, his mind reeling. Was the nurse mistaken? Had she been talking about someone else? Or was this some cruel joke? Before he could process the impossibility of it, the sedative began its work, pulling a thick veil over his senses. Through the rapidly descending fog, Noah saw the old man on the bed begin to twitch. The twitching escalated into familiar, violent thrashing, his limbs flailing, his body arching off the mattress, exactly as he had done when bound by restraints. But there were no restraints now. He was convulsing with phantom bindings, lost in the same nightly terror as before. The sight was deeply unnerving, illogical. Then, the heavy curtain of the sedative fell completely, plunging Noah into oblivion. He woke the next morning, heart pounding, the memory vivid and disturbing. The old man's bed was empty. Throughout the day, Noah wrestled with what he'd seen. Had the sedative induced a hallucination? Was his improving mind playing tricks on him, stressed by the environment and the news of the man's death? He desperately wanted a logical explanation. That evening, the exact same sequence unfolded. The old man appeared shortly after medication time, walked calmly to his bed, gave Noah that same small nod, lay down, and then began his violent, unrestrained thrashing just as Noah's consciousness faded. And again, the bed was empty in the morning. This impossible pattern repeated for a third night. By the fourth evening, Noah was consumed by a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. He felt a prickling awareness that something was profoundly wrong. This time, the old man entered the room slightly earlier, before Noah had even taken his nightly dose. He walked to his bed, sat down, and instead of lying back, he simply stared directly at Noah. There was an unnerving intensity in his gaze, a focus that hadn't been there before. Feeling a surge of panic, Noah quickly fumbled for his medication and swallowed it, wanting the escape of the drug-induced sleep more than ever. As the familiar warmth began to spread through his limbs, blurring the edges of his vision, the old man on the bed began to thrash. But then, abruptly, he stopped. He pushed himself upright, sitting rigidly on the edge of the mattress. He fixed his gaze squarely on Noah, his expression unreadable in the dim light. And then he spoke, his voice raspy but clear enough to cut through Noah's gathering stupor. "What are you suspicious about?" Noah felt a jolt of pure fear. Suspicious? About what? Before he could formulate a thought, let alone a reply, the full force of the sedative hit him, dragging him down into darkness. The next day felt different. The fear had solidified into a grim certainty. Noah sought out the nurse again, his voice trembling slightly this time. "That man," he insisted, "the one you said was dead, I've seen him every night. He was here again last night, he spoke to me. Stop imagining things or you'll find yourself in a different ward." Her dismissal was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Later, Noah confided in one of the other patients in the room, an older man closer to his own age who seemed more approachable, the older roommate. He recounted the nightly appearances, the impossible thrashing, the chilling question. The older roommate listened patiently, his expression growing serious. "Look," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. "Don't talk about it, especially not to the staff, just ignore it, take your meds, go to sleep. It's not worth the trouble." His warning was clear, hinting at unspoken knowledge or fear, but Noah couldn't ignore it. That night, the dread was palpable. As expected, the old man appeared again after Noah took his pill. The silent nod, the lying down, the thrashing. Then, just as Noah's senses dimmed, the figure sat bolt upright again, fixing him with that intense stare. The raspy voice filled the room once more, louder this time, more insistent. "What are you suspicious about? What are you so suspicious about?" The next morning, desperate, Noah cornered the older roommate again. "You have to believe me," he pleaded. He was there again. He asked me again. "Listen to me, Noah," he said, his tone heavy with finality. "The staff said he died. Okay, he died, so whatever you've been seeing, whatever spoke to you, it wasn't him. Not the living version anyway, he's gone. The appearances, the impossible physics of the thrashing without restraints, the accusatory questions aimed directly at him. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He hadn't been hallucinating due to stress or medication. He had been sharing his room, night after night, with the restless spirit of the dead man. The complication wasn't just a disruption of routine, it was a terrifying intrusion from beyond the grave. The confirmation struck Noah with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't stress, it wasn't medication-induced hallucination. It was real, a ghost. The ghost of the man who had died in this very ward, perhaps even in that very bed across from him. And horrifyingly, this ghost seemed aware of Noah, aware of his observations, his unspoken doubts. "What are you suspicious about?" The words replayed in his mind, no longer just creepy, but deeply menacing. What was he suspicious about? The death itself, the facility. Did the spirit somehow sense his unease and perceive it as a threat or an intrusion? The relative calm Noah had begun to feel in his recovery evaporated instantly, replaced by raw, primal fear. He was trapped in a locked ward, miles from home, surrounded by staff who dismissed his terror as delusion and fellow patients too afraid or too numb to help. Worse, he was trapped within his own chemically vulnerable state. Every single night, he was required to take a potent sedative that rendered him utterly helpless, plunging him into unconsciousness while the spectral resident of the room was free to roam, to watch, perhaps even to interact. The realization brought forth a terrifying, central question that consumed Noah's thoughts. How could he possibly endure this? How could he survive the remaining month of his mandatory stay, facing this nightly terror in a state of forced vulnerability? What could he possibly do when trapped in a room with an accusatory spirit, knowing that each sunset brought not rest, but the looming certainty of another encounter, while sleep offered no refuge, only defenselessness? His immediate, desperate need became crystal clear. He had to get out of that room. But how? The terror of that realization, knowing he was facing a conscious, interactive spirit each night while chemically incapacitated, galvanized Noah into immediate action. The very next morning, sleep-deprived and shaky, but fiercely resolute, he bypassed the dismissive ward staff and demanded to speak directly with a doctor or someone in charge. He laid it out plainly. He was significantly better, his alcohol cravings had virtually disappeared, he no longer felt the need for the potent evening sedatives, and under absolutely no circumstances could he spend another night in that specific room. He didn't dare mention the ghost directly, fearing they'd label him delusional and perhaps transfer him to the psychiatric ward proper, but his palpable fear and desperate insistence must have struck a chord. Perhaps seeing his genuine distress, or perhaps just following protocol for a patient reporting significant improvement, the administration arranged for a doctor to assess him promptly. The doctor conducted a thorough evaluation, asking questions, observing his demeanor. He concurred that Noah seemed stable, coherent, and genuinely past the acute phase of withdrawal. Acknowledging Noah's plea and his improved condition, the doctor authorized a transfer. Not discharge, not yet. He still had time left on his mandatory stay, but a move to a different building, a pre-discharge ward. This ward housed patients nearing the end of their treatment, those deemed stable enough for a less restrictive environment while awaiting final clearance and pickup by relatives. The relief Noah felt upon being moved was immense, almost overwhelming. He practically ran out of the first ward, not daring to look back at the room that had become his personal echo chamber of fear. The new building felt different, brighter, less oppressive. The pre-discharge ward was unlike the stark rehab wing. It was a mixed-gender common room with multiple beds, but also a shared television area. The patients here seemed more lucid, quieter, closer to normalcy. Noah finally allowed himself to breathe, believing the nightmare was over. He had escaped the ghost of the old man. His new room already had occupants. A quiet teenage girl, perhaps 15 or 16, whom we'll call Sarah, apparently recovering from inhalant abuse, and a weary-looking middle-aged woman in her 40s, Martha, whose reasons for being there weren't immediately clear. Noah tried to settle in, grateful for the change of scenery and the absence of nightly medication requirements here. However, a new strangeness soon emerged. Every night, as darkness fell and the ward quieted down, Sarah and Martha exhibited bizarre behavior. They would push their two beds close together against the farthest wall from the door. Then they would both climb onto one bed, huddle tightly together, and pull the blankets completely over their heads, remaining silent and hidden until morning. They never watched the television that Noah often turned on quietly near his own bed by the door. After observing this for 3 or 4 nights, Noah's curiosity, perhaps tinged with his recent experience, got the better of him. During the daytime, he gently asked them, "Are you too afraid of ghosts or something? Why do you huddle together like that every night?" Sarah burst into tears, pleading, "Please don't talk about it. Not in here, please don't." Martha shot Noah a warning look, her voice low and strained. "It's better not to speak of such things, young man. Especially not here." He recounted parts of his own terrifying experience with the old man's ghost in the previous ward, perhaps trying to show solidarity or simply unable to keep it in. He even foolishly tried to lighten the mood by teasing them later, making casual remarks about bumps in the night as they passed. He fundamentally misunderstood that their fear wasn't general superstition, it was specific to this room. That very night, his cavalier attitude bore horrifying fruit. As usual, Sarah and Martha retreated to their huddled sanctuary under the blankets. Noah, feeling restless, sat on the edge of his bed watching the communal television, keeping the volume low. Suddenly, the screen flickered and went black. Annoyed, he picked up the remote, but pressing the buttons did nothing. Assuming a glitch with the TV set itself, he stood up, walked over to it, and pressed the physical power button. The screen flickered back to life. He turned to walk back to his bed, and froze. Sitting silently on the edge of the bed immediately next to his own, a bed that had been empty moments before, was a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing the standard hospital-issued gown. She sat completely still, hugging her knees to her chest, resting her chin on her knees, simply staring blankly towards the flickering television screen. Noah's breath caught. He hadn't heard anyone enter. He cautiously asked, hello, when did you get here? Are you new to the ward? Wanna watch TV? He called out softly towards the far end of the room, "Hey, Sarah, Martha, we've got company watching TV now. Aren't you going to join?" Only silence answered him from beneath the mound of blankets, though he sensed they were awake, rigid with fear. Trying to shake off his growing apprehension, Noah sat back down and watched TV for what felt like half an hour. The young woman never moved, never spoke, never acknowledged him. Finally, deciding the silence was too unnerving, he spoke again. "Look, are you planning to sleep soon? If you are, I can turn off the TV." She spoke, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet carrying an unnatural resonance. "Could you please just keep it down?" she murmured. "Not like every other night." "Keep what down?" He reached for the remote, intending to lower the volume further. As he turned back towards her, intending to ask what she meant, she opened her mouth, and kept opening it. Wider and wider, stretching impossibly, inhumanly wide, far beyond any natural limit. And from that grotesque cavity erupted a sound that chilled Noah to the bone, a horrifying, cyclical noise alternating between a low, guttural, mocking laugh. "Hey, hey, hey," and a sudden, piercingly high-pitched shriek. Pure terror obliterated thought. Noah scrambled backwards, falling off his bed, then scrambled to his feet and bolted blindly for the door, crashing into furniture. Simultaneously, the mound of blankets at the far end of the room exploded as Sarah and Martha also screamed and fled into the corridor. Their combined panic and screams brought 2 burly male orderlies running. The orderlies immediately grabbed Noah, assuming his frantic state was a relapse, perhaps alcohol-induced psychosis. "What's wrong with you? Thought you were better. Trying to cause trouble?" one snarled. Noah, gasping for breath, pointed frantically back towards the room, babbling about the laughing woman. Sarah and Martha, trembling uncontrollably, corroborated his story, sobbing about the figure they knew haunted the room. But the orderlies exchanged skeptical glances. They made no move towards the open door of the darkened room from which the sounds of terror had erupted. Instead, they became menacing. "Get back inside, all of you." Now, one commanded, gesturing threateningly with the nightstick at his belt. Despite the patient's terrified pleas and insistence that something was in there, the orderlies refused to enter or investigate. They physically forced the 3 trembling patients back over the threshold and slammed the door shut, leaving them inside. Trapped again, Noah, Sarah, and Martha scrambled to the furthest corner of the room, huddling together in shared terror, worlds away from Noah's earlier dismissal of their fears. They didn't see the laughing woman again directly that night, but her presence felt thick and suffocating in the room. And all night long, the television screen flickered, channels changing seemingly at random, the volume rising and falling erratically on its own. A final, chilling display of paranormal power in the darkness. Noah didn't sleep a wink. The moment the first hint of dawn broke, signaling the end of that horrific night, he found a way, perhaps a phone in the common area, perhaps begging a morning shift nurse, to make a frantic, desperate call to his wife. He barely managed to choke out the words, pleading with her to come and get him now, that he couldn't stay another minute, that something terrible was happening. His wife, alarmed by the sheer terror in his voice, immediately contacted the person who relayed this story to me. They didn't waste a second, rushing to the facility. They found Noah pale, shaking, traumatized. He recounted the entire ordeal, from the old man's ghost to the terrifying laughing woman. When Noah's wife confronted the hospital staff, demanding his immediate release and alluding to the horrific events, there was a notable lack of denial or argument. Whether they knew about the hauntings or simply wanted to avoid further complication with a distressed patient and his family, they quickly processed his early discharge. Noah signed the papers, walked out of that facility, and never looked back. He had survived, physically at least, but the experiences left deep scars. He escaped the haunted hospital, but the questions linger. Who was the laughing woman? Why did these spirits manifest so aggressively? And as the person who shared this story with me pointed out, that facility, known for treating troubled minds, still stands, still operates. Its walls potentially holding more secrets and sorrows than anyone truly knows. Did this story give you goosebumps? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more scary stories like this one, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel.